All right, let's continue our discussion regarding the question of God's existence. In the last video, I talked about the principle of sufficient reason. I said that if something can be different from what it is, then it requires an explanation to explain why is it that it is the way that it is and not the other possible ways. I call that the principle of sufficient reason. We applied that to the existence of things. We said, okay, if it is possible for something to not be, then it requires an explanation to activate that existence at this moment. We talked about how this chain of explanations cannot go forever because each link, the explanatory power of each link obviously depends upon the existence of that link, which is conditional on the action of the previous links. And in this case, the explanatory power of each link comes from the previous links. And even if we continue this forever, this conditional explanatory power does not vanish, which means that if the first link has an explanation, then this chain must come to an end. And if it comes to an end, then it comes to an end in a necessary being. So in summary, the last video showed that the set of necessary beings is non-empty. Now today I have a much more difficult job trying to show that the set of necessary beings can only contain one member. We cannot have more than one necessary being. Okay, how can I show that? Let's start with two necessary beings. If I can explain the idea in two necessary beings, it easily can be extended to more. Let's say we have the set of necessary beings and two necessary beings within them. When we are assuming that we have two necessary beings, we are basically assuming that there is something distinct between them, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to consistently talk about two necessary beings if they are 100% identical. We cannot distinguish them, so it's not easy to defend how we can have two necessary beings which are completely identical to each other. So there must be something different between them. I believe that this is enough to give us the information that each necessary being can be different from what it is. It cannot be different in its existence because they're necessary beings, but they must have the ability to be different. They have the possibility to be different from what they are. Because as a necessary being, there is another necessary being with some form of difference. To make this clear, imagine that I bring you a basket of some fruit. Let's call it the fruit X. You haven't seen that fruit at all. You don't know what it is, from which family it comes. And I bring you this basket of fruit, and I show you one of them. And let's say that is red. The color is red. And I ask you this question. I ask you, is it possible for this fruit X, as the fruit X, is it possible for it to be different from what it is, from this? For example, the color. Let's just focus on one thing. Is it possible for the color of this fruit X to be different from what it is? How would we answer that question? Now, if someone asks me that question, what I would do is I would look at the basket of the fruit X, right? If I don't see any fruit X with any different color, if I see all of them red, what I can say is that I don't know. Based on the information that I have, it might be possible that the fruit X has a different color, or it might not be possible. I don't know. But if I do see a fruit in there with a yellow color, then I can say that yes, it is possible for this fruit to have a different color. Why? Because there is a fruit in the basket of X, in the set of the fruit X, with a different color. So this fruit, as a fruit X, can have a different color. In the same sense that in the first video I talked about the hair color of a human being, and I said, okay, for me as a human being, I can have a different hair color from the one that I have right now. Why? Because there are other human beings who have a different hair color. Therefore, if we have two necessary beings and they're different from each other, then each one as a necessary being can be different from what it is, because we have another one which by definition is different from this one. And that's why we can have, for example, an A and a B. We can distinguish two necessary beings, necessary being A and B, and they're different from each other. So the way that now I'm going to use the principle of sufficient reason is to look at the set of necessary beings that now has, for example, two necessary beings within it. And then I ask the question, is it possible for this set to be different from what it is right now? And based on what I explained right now, the answer should be yes, it is possible. Why? Because A as a necessary being could have been different, and B as a necessary being could have been different. Or in other words, if A turns to B and B turns to A change has happened. The set will be a different one. Because now instead of A we have B, instead of B we have A. If someone claims that no, the set will not change, then I will doubt whether we are actually talking about two distinct necessary beings, and we're not talking about the one necessary being. So again, if we have two necessary beings, that means that each one as a necessary being is possible for it to be different from what it is, because it must be we must be able to distinguish them from each other, so there must be something different between them, which means that the set of necessary beings can be different from what it is. So now the principle of sufficient reason kicks in. We have this set, it can be different from what it is. Why is it that it is the way that it is right now? So it's a similar, now we're getting to the similar form of argumentation, but now we're not talking about existence anymore, because now we're talking about necessary beings. So we're now talking about a more general framework. Existence is out of the question, it's just about the other stuff. If it is possible for it to be different, then it requires an explanation. Now, similar to what I did for the existence, as I explained, if something is contingent, if it is possible for it to not be, then it cannot be the explanation for its own existence. If something is the explanation for its own existence, then it must be necessary, because it has to be ontologically prior to itself to activate its own existence. So in the same sense, I'm going to argue that the explanation for the set of necessary beings cannot be the set of necessary beings as it is right now. Okay, so the set of necessary beings can be different from what it is, and it requires an explanation by the PSR, principle of sufficient reason. And it cannot be, the explanation cannot be the set as it is right now, the complete set as it is right now. Because if it were, then in a similar fashion, it would mean that this set as it is ontologically prior to itself, which I believe would mean that this set cannot be different from what it is. Because it cannot be different, because if we say that it is possible for it to be different from what it is, then it means that there is this possibility that this set as it is does not exist. So it cannot bring itself into existence. But if the set as it is activated, it means that itself as it is must have been ontologically prior to what it is. And that would mean that it's impossible for it to be different from what it is. But we assume that it can be different. So to wrap up, the set can be different from what it is, and itself as it is cannot be the explanation for why it is the way that it is. So what can be the explanation for it? Well, the only option that we have is that it must be a subset of it. It cannot be the whole thing. There's nothing more than it. You can also see that it cannot be a contingent thing, because again, a contingent thing, the existence of it itself depends on a necessary being, which will come down again to the set of necessary beings. We're asking about explanation for a set of necessary beings, so only option that we have is to look at necessary options that we have. it cannot be the set itself. So the only option that we have is that it must be some part of this set, some subset of this set, not in a mathematical sense, but some part of this set of these members, for example, A and B. Okay, so we have the set of necessary beings. It can be different from what it is because it has more than one member. Therefore, it requires an explanation. And the explanation for why it is the way that it is a subset of that set, a kind of strict subset. Now, the question is that we repeat the argument for that subset. We ask, is it possible for that subset to be different from what it is? If the answer is yes, then there must be another part of the set of necessary beings that is the explanation. And we can ask about the next subset again. Is it possible for it to be different than it is? And if it's yes, then it requires another explanation. And then we keep this going, right? So in the same sense that we started with the existence, now we're asking about whether they can be different from what they are. So now the question is, can this chain of explanation go forever? Now, if we keep saying yes to that answer, is it possible for it to be different from what it is? If we answer yes, then this chain will keep going forever. I will come back to this, but first let's see what would happen if anywhere on this chain we say no. If you keep doing this and somewhere you get to a set and I ask you, is it possible for this set to be different from what it is? And you say no. What does that mean? What does that entail? Well, it will give me immediately the fact that, the set cannot be different from what it is. And it would give me immediately the fact that there must be only one member in that set, right? Because if you have more than one member, they can be different from what they are. The set can be different from what it is. So if the set cannot be different from what it is, we cannot have more than one member. So if anywhere on this chain of questions we say no, then we have come to a set that is only one member in it. And that member is a necessary being that cannot be different from what it is. But if we come to that conclusion that we have this set of necessary being, we have this one necessary being that cannot be different from what it is, it means that there cannot be more than one necessary being. Which means that the original set that we started with could only have this one member. So the whole chain of question could not have started, right? Because the set of necessary beings that we showed from the previous lecture, it would have been this one necessary being, and there wouldn't be no yes to the question of can this set be different from what it is from the start. So there's like a very interesting situation. If we keep saying yes forever, then this chain can go on forever. But if we can say no on any part of this chain, means that we can never say yes at all. Because if we say no, then means that we can only have one necessary being. And if we only have one necessary being, then the set of necessary beings cannot be different from what it is. And if the set of necessary beings cannot be different from what it is, the whole chain of questions that led to that chain could not even start from the beginning. There wouldn't be any first yes to start this chain. So it will all collapse into this one set of necessary being, this one set that has only one member in it, and it's impossible for it to be different from what it is. It's impossible for it to be more than one. So we have this interesting situation. We have now this bifurcation. We have two options, two alternatives. Either we have this one necessary being that cannot be different from what it is, and that's the only one that we can have. Or we keep saying yes to the answer of principle sufficient reason, and this goes forever. Now, regarding the existence of things that can be that are contingent, I provide an argument why this cannot go forever. But I cannot provide similar arguments here, because the existence of these explanations, the existence of these chains of explanation, they're not dependent on their previous chains, because they are by definition necessary beings. We're talking about the set of necessary beings. So now we can also remove that assumption that we have only two. We can have finite, we can have infinite, whatever. Now, is there a way that we can cut off that possibility? Right now, I can't think of any. So for me, that's also a viable option. It's a kind of weird option that you can have a chain of explanation forever. And I don't think it's true, but I can't really provide a solid argument like the one that we have for the existence. Because I believe if you want to provide one, this is the situation is very similar to what St. Thomas has in his third way about the necessary beings. Why can't we have like an infinite chain of necessary beings? But I don't agree with the argument that St. Thomas brings up, because he talks about the efficient causes, and it says again it's similar fashion to efficient causes that can go forever. The chain of infinite necessary beings cannot go forever, so there must be one absolutely necessary being. But I don't think that works here. So I still want to keep that option open and just investigate it a little bit further. So one, let's just call them some names. So this one necessary being, we can call it the ultimate explanation alternative. And the other one, we can call it infinite explanation alternative, because one is the ultimate one. There's just one in the end. The other one is going forever. The point is that is something that we have to be careful here, is that what we showed, we haven't really proved completely that this ultimate explanation has to be the one possible option. It has to be that one. But we have shown one thing. We have shown that there is no finite there is no finite brute force alternative. You either have to go forever, or you only have to have one ultimate explanation. Because sometimes people in between atheism, sometimes I see this kind of answer that maybe it's possible that the chain of explanation comes down to this set of just brute facts, these necessary beings, these fundamental simples, that they're more than one, so they're distinct from each other, but that's it. That's the end of it. There's nothing more than that. I believe the argument disproves that position. It doesn't show that it has to be the ultimate explanation. It has to be this one necessary being, but it also shows that you cannot stop at some place. It either has to go forever, or it has to come down to one ultimate explanation. So we have the ultimate explanation alternative and the infinite explanation alternative. Of course, I will try to think about arguments why this case cannot be made, but it won't be as powerful as the one that we brought up for the existence. And I also like to keep it open, because I believe it will be our link to basically the scientific atheism, something like that it will keep us connected to that worldview, that we can always have this option open, that there is no God, but the chain of explanation just goes forever and ever and ever. I even like that option. That's an interesting option. But you can imagine the problems that you can have. First of all, you have to have like actual infinite number of these subsets, and then the explanation going forever. And I believe if you go into more metaphysical details, you should be able to connect the fact that something can be different from what it is to the fact that it is possible for it to not exist. Because at some level, being different can imply being contingent. You know what I mean? Like, if I say that, okay, I have this specific hair color, but my hair color can be different from what it is, then this implies the contingency in the hair color, in the actual like molecule that's in my hair, that brings up this specific color. So the change that we have, that something can be different, ultimately can be connected in a sense to an existence of something. And I believe if we go into that sort of details, that we might be able to come up a similar argument for why the chain of explanatory power in the necessary beings cannot go forever. But I'd rather not go into those details, and I just keep it as it is. And so, okay, it's either that or that. Because at least it gives us something important, that assumption that, hey, we can come up to these fundamental particles and that's it. That's not possible. At least this argument, in my view, proves that that's not possible. So either it's infinite, you have to be consistent with that sort of view that just keeps on going on forever, which is weird. I mean, or you have to get on an ultimate explanation. So from now on, I will keep both options open, but I will focus mainly on the ultimate explanation, because on this infinite explanation, there's not much we can do. Out of this part, there's not much we can do, but on this ultimate explanation, I believe there are much interesting theories that can come out of it. So I guess that will be it for this video, that we showed that, okay, if we start from the arguments, we get to this a crossroad that you get on one side, you get the infinite explanation alternative. On the other side, you get the ultimate explanation alternative. And I will try in next videos to look more into details of this ultimate explanation and how that can lead to the concept of God. So yeah, as I said, it's the closer we get to the concept of God, the more blurry everything will get. It will be more difficult to navigate. Things are less clear, but that's also the interesting part of it. Trying to take your steps, try to see where we can go in that kind of foggy area. But we'll see what happens. Yeah. Cheers.